Hey guys, welcome back. So for this one, we're getting into the Carnage Reigns Big Spill, which will cover the 7-issue event in its entirety, as we follow Miles going toe-to-toe with Cletus Kasady in his new symbiote, while Miles gets him a new suit. And I'ma say it again, fingers crossed we get this suit in Spider-Man 2 at some point, cause it's fire. And I saw they had the other one, but nah. And I mean, I'll take it, but you know what I'm trying to say. But either way, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top to get all notifications so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so with us getting into Carnage Reigns, it's almost like we're just continuing from Carnage issue 12 and turning an extra page in that story. Cause coming back now, we begin at the same location, Todd's Diner, with Miles showing up and quickly realizing that he's about to be reunited with Cletus Kasady, cause the last time that these two met, it was during Absolute Carnage, which was a very terrifying experience for Miles for a number of reasons, because not only was Cletus Kasady's ultimate meter full the whole time, but also Miles still has the image of Cassidy breaking Scorpion's spine right in front of him, living in his mind rent-free. And on top of that, when Carnage inducted Miles into his horde, this literally took Miles into a dark place, because not only did he have a piece of Cletus Kasady in his mind, dragging him deeper into the hive, but also Miles remembers Cassidy showing him what at the time he would say was his full potential, and not the good kind, which is something that nobody really needs to see, you know, their worst potential, because Miles even admits seeing something like that stains you, because you're just not the same after. And he even goes on to describe it as a bell that just can't be unrung, because even to this day, Miles is losing sleep over what happened in Absolute Carnage. And Miles still can't shake the words of Cletus Kasady, what he said to him when Cletus was in his mind, when he told Miles that he's just like him, and if Miles only lets go, he just might start to enjoy it, which are words that have been just haunting Miles with the idea that he may become a psychopath just like Cletus. But when Miles shows up, he notices that the police believe that this is a hostage situation, but he knows that there's no way that that's even close, because if Cassidy's here, it's a slaughter. So Miles goes camouflage and makes his way inside. But as he makes his way inside, he can't help but to think about how he's supposed to be helping his parents move, and how if Cassidy doesn't kill him, then his dad definitely will. And during this time, he's almost eaten by a wall. And I can't help but to think like, man, you need to get your head in the game, bro. Because the Cassidy that Miles is up against now, he has some new tricks up his sleeve. And Miles gets a taste of that pretty early, because when he makes his way into the diner, still camouflaged, crawling on the ceiling, the cook turns the light on, and he tells Miles to not leave any paw prints up there. Which in just about any other situation, this would have seemed to be close to normal. But with us heading into this from the Carnage series, we know that everybody in this diner is already dead, with the exception of Kenneth Neely. And with Cletus Kasady creating this replica of a regular night at the diner, he's able to make this very accurate since he has the blood and the memories of everyone who he slaughtered here. And as Miles skeptically walks around the diner, knowing that at least these people weren't here before, not when he first got here, he's asked by Kenneth Neely to have a seat and join him for some French toast, with Kenneth telling Miles that he took the liberty of placing an order for him. And he tells Miles that Cletus Kasady didn't share with him this part of his plan, but he's sure that it's spectacular, because in a way this kind of reminds Neely of the Last Supper, since this entire illusion, including the French toast, is part of Cassidy's Extremis Grendel symbiote, which currently is his body. And Neely's actually eating this stuff, so it's wild, but for Miles it's a hard pass. And then suddenly, without warning, Cassidy jumps on Miles and he takes a bite, which seems to be something that Cassidy brought along with him from his time with Carnage, with him still having the ability to bypass Miles' spider sense, but also with Cassidy sinking his teeth into Miles. He's not directly going for the kill, because as Miles would describe it, Cassidy would much rather break your mind and soul first, which sounds about right. And while Cassidy is snacking on Miles, Neely is just happy to have had a meal for the first time in weeks, even if the whole thing was made out of symbiote, which I guess is better to him than the scraps he's been munching on. But you gotta be a different kind of animal to just be out here eating Extrembio McGrindles, even if they taste just like French toast. He's still wildin' for that one. But with Miles being in excruciating pain, he's eventually able to wiggle his way out of Cassidy's bite. But after getting an up-close look at what Cassidy's become now, Miles is very certain that this is not Carnage. In the way that he describes Cassidy's look, he says it looks like Carnage threw up on Iron Man. which is funny because it reminds me of one of you guys saying that Cassidy now looks like a Swamp Thing Iron Man amalgamation, which for me, that's the description I like a bit more. But with Miles attempting to evade Cassidy, he's knocked into another room where now he gets a second to catch his breath and also pick out the broken teeth that are still in his shoulder. But while Miles is here, he sees Dominic, who we first met in Carnage issue 12, hiding in the corner, whispering to get Miles' attention so he can get him out of here. Meanwhile, outside, we see Agent Gao stopping Sergeant Ahmed from calling the mayor and getting the Avengers out here. And as a really quick backstory on Agent Gao, she's been given the task of putting together a strike force to enforce the Powers Act, which kinda has a Suicide Squad vibe to it, but the description that we're given, it's more like the Thunderbolts, but closer to a street level version. And as it stands, Agent Gao, she kinda does things her own way, and she doesn't want Mayor Cage sticking his nose in it. But as part of her strike force, she's also recruited Mac Gargan, who's probably the last person that you're thinking wants to be here after what happened the last time he faced Cassidy. But Gargan very much wants to get involved because he wants to get some payback for the way that Cassidy did him in Absolute Carnage. But when Gargan and his team make their way into the building, they hear whispers in the walls saying over here, no over here, which just has these dudes freaking out, where then Cassidy just reaches out from the wall grabbing one of these guys, and it quickly just turns into this terrifying massacre where another one of them is just shooting at Cassidy and saying, I got him, only for another Cassidy to come out from the wall behind him and spin his top. And for a moment we get the notion that these guys aren't complete idiots because they use Sonics, which are usually your guaranteed go-to versus a symbiote. But unfortunately, going into this, these guys just aren't aware of the fact that Cassidy is already surrounding them from every angle, which really is the curtain call for Gargan's men. But Scorpion, on the other hand, he just goes after any and every Cassidy that he sees popping up, telling them all that he's not afraid. And it's kind of messed up how when Cassidy sees Gargan, he's just like, hiya Mac, good to see you back on your feet. To where then Scorpion's tail just clears the room. And off to the side, you still have Kenneth Neely, who's sitting in a chair just watching, front row at the Cletus Kasady show. And at first, Scorpion thinks that he's one of the survivors, but Neely clears that up quick because Carnage doesn't really do the survivors thing. So Scorpion's like, yep, that checks out. So Neely tells Scorpion his whole backstory on how he used to be the artist, but now he's leaving that to the professionals. And Scorpion's more or less like, alright, cool story bro, let's go to jail. Meanwhile, over with Miles, we find that he's taking Dominic to the roof to get him out of there. And in his mind, Miles is kind of like, okay, one step closer to getting Dominic to safety. But at the same time, he's kind of like, or am I trying to just get further away from Cassidy? So he lets Dominic know that what they're gonna do is jump, but Dominic lets him know that he can't jump that far. But Miles tells him that he can. So he reaches back for Dominic's hand, and he tells him to trust him. But when Dominic reaches back, it's not Dominic, but instead it was Cletus Kasady this whole time. Cause like we knew, Cassidy didn't leave any survivors. And now for Miles, with him quickly taking down this imposter with the hopes of getting out of here and calling the big guns, he's then hit by another Cletus who pops up behind him and slashes his back. And Cassidy just tells Miles that he's out of his depth, and he asks him, what's it like to know you're about to die? What's it like knowing your whole family's next? And coming from behind Cassidy, Scorpion steps in, saving Miles, which at first has Miles asking him, why is he helping him? And Scorpion tells him he didn't plan on it, because he thought the other Spider-Man was here. So more or less if it was Peter, he would have let him die. But suddenly Scorpion's stabbed in the back, because Cletus Kasady is just the gift that keeps on giving. But Cletus even goes as far as to tell Scorpion about back when he broke his back, that wasn't nothing personal, because he had to get his codex so he could wake up a god. But while he was in there doing the back breaking part, Cassidy tells him that that part was just because he was bored. And with Scorpion, yet again at the mercy of Cassidy, he lets Miles know that he's sorry, and he tells Miles that it's all on him. So Miles then musters up what strength he has left, and he charges up his Venom Blast, knowing that this is one of those moments where you face a monster and you don't hold back. And he punches Cassidy right on top of that arc reactor, which quickly causes the Symbiote to go unstable. And this whole time Cassidy is still making his threats on how he's gonna peel Miles as soon as he gets himself together. But Miles just tells Scorpion, we gotta get out of here, he's gonna blow. And at the last second, Cassidy's like, wait, what's an arc reactor? Just before he overloads and lights up the Brooklyn sky. But even still, the Cletus Kasady show is far from over. Alright, so for this one, we come back just after Cletus Kasady's overload, which leveled the entire building above Todd's diner, sending both Miles and Scorpion tumbling all the way from the rooftop down to the sewers underneath. which is a long way. But now with these guys covered in debris, they're forced to work together to get out of this, which Miles has no problem with, but Scorpion on the other hand, he's like, I'm not doing the team thing. And again, these guys have to work together or they're just stuck down here. So Miles takes the first step by lifting up the debris so Scorpion can get a better angle to help Miles out. But when Scorpion climbs out, he just gives Miles this dirty look, like he's getting ready to double cross him, and Miles calls him out like, hey man, I don't like that look. Then suddenly Scorpion uses his tail to snatch Miles out before the debris falls on him, and not so much out of the kindness of his heart, but rather because he doesn't want the death of Spider-Man to mess up his probation situation. And now with the two of them free, there's a bit of an argument, mostly because of Scorpion, since he wants to be the one to radio for backup and make it look like he got the situation under control, which he clearly doesn't. And while they're arguing, suddenly they hear a voice calling for help, letting them know that they're down there and they're trapped, and right away Scorpion's thinking this is Cassidy, this is another trick. But Miles doesn't want to take that chance, so he at least tries to help this lady out, while Scorpion cautiously hangs back, waiting for her to transform into Cletus Kasady, like the last person Miles tried to help. Meanwhile, when we head up top to Agent Gal, who's being told by Captain Ahmed that it's likely Cletus Kasady was killed in the blast, Agent Gal's not buying it, because in a short story that we were given called Dead to Rights, which took us all the way back to Maximum Carnage, this gave us the reason why Agent Gal has a chip on her shoulder and a grudge towards Cletus Kasady, because at the time both her and Detective John Shade found themselves in the path of a fight between Carnage, Venom, and Spider-Man, where at the time Shade had been knocked out of the way while Gal was covering for Park as he called for backup. But suddenly, when Spider-Man came flying into one of the police cars, Gal went over to Spidey trying to wake him up, only for Carnage to then snatch Park and kill him, which is a death that Gal still blames herself for to this day, when really, to be honest, there's nothing she could have done at the time, because it seems to be more the case of her having survivor's guilt, since she was the last man standing, so to speak, which is why going forward into the present day, she wants to make sure that Park's death meant something. And as we continue, we'll see and learn more about how she's going about this, because even though this started with Cletus Kasady, Agent Gal really doesn't care for supers at all. She only sees them as a target or a means to an end. And right now, with her having a hunch that Cletus Kasady is still out there somewhere, she sees this as the worst possible outcome, because initially Cassidy was contained in this building, but now there's no telling where he could be. And with her being informed that her men lost contact with Scorpion, she makes a phone call for her backup to come in. Meanwhile, back down under in the sewers, Miles and Scorpion hear yet another person who's trapped, and now Scorpion's like, man, you gotta be kidding me. Can we just get out of here? But yet again, Miles refuses to leave anyone behind, so he rushes in to get this guy out from under the rubble. So from there, they can figure out how to get the four of them back up to the streets. And it isn't long before Miles comes up with an idea of using the water pressure to carry all of them back up to the street, which is mad risky, but it's really their only option right now. And even with Scorpion trying to talk him out of it, Miles just webs up the other two and he tells Scorpion that he got this, because there's really no time to keep going back and forth, lest they miss this opportunity, which could be their only one. So Miles tells everyone to hold their breath, because they definitely don't want to swallow this water. So next, Miles kicks the compromised leaking wall, which spews out a ton of water, shooting the four of them back up to the street, where now there's a brief moment of celebration, with Miles saving Scorpion himself along with the paramedic and the other soldier, only for this to be cut short when Agent Gal steps in, telling the officers to handcuff Spider-Man. Which again, for Gal, it just goes back to how much she hates supers, cause the paramedic he saved, she tells Gal if it wasn't for Spider-Man they wouldn't have got out. And Scorpion even puts a word in, telling Gal that Spider-Man can prove to be useful, cause he did good back there. And he even goes as far as to let Agent Gal know that the building came down because of Cassidy, not Spider-Man. But during this time, the fourth person they brought up to the top, he's been really quiet. So the paramedic, she goes to check on him, only to find that he was Cletus Kasady this whole time. Though in this case, we're told that it's more like Cassidy possessed Scott and used him as a distraction. So it's a little different than what we saw in Carnage Reigns Alpha, where he was shapeshifting and posing as his previous victims. But with Miles seeing Cassidy come back, he breaks out of his handcuffs easily, and he goes after Cassidy, only to find him electrocuted by somebody else and hit with multiple arrows, which now introduces the help that Agent Gal had mentioned earlier, with them being Electro, Taskmaster, and a speedster named Hightail, all of whom being members of Gal's team called the Cape Killers, where in their case, let's be honest, Marvel's once again doing their version of the Suicide Squad, which to me is not a bad thing, because Marvel and DC have been stealing ideas from each other for decades, so I don't mind it. But what they really need as far as this idea goes is a concept that hits and sticks around. for a substantial amount of time, because to me the closest they've gotten is with the version of the Thunderbolts, but aside from that, we'll see this idea float around for a little bit and next thing you know, poof, it's gone. And I mean, this could be the same case, who knows. But nonetheless, with these Cape Killers showing up, they stop Cassidy quickly, only to find out that the real Cletus Kasady got away. So Agent Gal tells Miles that he can either go to jail or join the Cape Killers until Cassidy's handled, and she'll consider that to be his time served, which is messed up, but again, that's how Agent Gal works, like Amanda Waller, but in Marvel. And from here, next, going into Carnage issue 13, we find Kenneth Neely making his way through the sewers, looking for Cassidy, while also thinking about how the things that are happening here in Carnage Reigns are a byproduct of him provoking Cletus Kasady to leave St. Est's orphanage and get back to his murderous ways in hopes of bringing out the Cassidy that he needs to go after Carnage. But instead, like we'd seen, Carnage Reigns has turned into its own thing, and it's quickly become more than what Neely had in mind. But eventually he finds Cassidy at the Spire, miles beneath New York City, and it's here where Cassidy lets him know when he initially took the Extrembio from Tony Stark, he didn't have any plans for it, he just did it to prove a point, because at the time during Extreme Carnage, Cassidy and the Carnage Symbiote were still a thing. And with Neely hearing Cassidy bring up the Carnage Symbiote, he tries to steer the conversation back towards them going after Carnage, only for Cassidy to let Ken know that he needs to get fixed up, because after Miles hit him with that Venom Blast, it messed up something in the Extrembio to where now Cassidy feels like he has a microwave cooking him from the inside out. However, when Miles did this, it gave Cletus an idea, because for a moment he was connected, he was the wires, and now this has him thinking. Instead of using the Hive to remake the world in his own image, leaning further into the technology of the Extrembio just might prove to be a more versatile option. So Neely asks him, like, okay, well, what's the next move? And Cassidy tells him, since his Extrembio needs repair, he's got to take it down to the shop, much like a vehicle if it needed a spark plug. And as they head out, we then go back over to the Carnage Symbiote, where like we'd seen last, it's going through the memories of Detective Shade. And though it looks like the Carnage Symbiote is cutting open Detective Shade, it's really not. This is just how Shade's mind has put together this moment, since Shade doesn't want to be a suitable host for the Carnage Symbiote, which is something we're only given a glimpse of during Carnage Reigns, just to let us know what the Carnage Symbiote and Jonathan Shade are up to, since we've seen them last. Well, going back to Cletus Kasady, him and Neely make their way to Stark Unlimited HQ, making an entrance that is anything but subtle. And as soon as they get here, Cassidy is demanding that somebody takes him straight to Tony Stark, only for him to quickly find out that Tony Stark no longer runs this company, because now the company is being ran by Kelvin Hang as the result of a hostile takeover that now gives Orcus access to Stark Unlimited, which was initially done because Hang, or Fei Long, dedicated his second IPO to the promise of planet-size innovations in biology and climate science, which at the time set his sights on the promise of taking humanity to Mars. But the aftermath of Hickman's Avengers and X-Men Red ruined this opportunity for him, with the Avengers squandering the opportunity and the mutants seizing it before he could when they colonized Mars, which eventually led Fei Long to collaborating with Orcus and his hostile takeover of Stark Industries, which just made sense because of his hatred for Tony Stark and mutants. But for Cassidy, with him just strolling into Stark Unlimited, he's not aware of none of this. And unfortunately, when he asks one of these robot scientists, his words, to repair the repulsor in his chest, they're not able to do it because Stark's armor specs were never shared with the engineers. And for that reason, they haven't the slightest idea on how an Extrembiote works. But it isn't long until Cassidy sees one of the Stark Sentinels, and right away he knows that he wants them to put him in one of those, with these engineers having no idea if the Extrembiote will even accept the Stark Sentinel's components, but they do it anyway because they know if they don't, he gonna kill him. So Cassidy requests that they give him access to the online system, and while he's being worked on, he tells Neely that he needs him to watch his six, so he gives Neely a piece of his symbiote along with some extra Stark parts that are just laying around, which at first for Neely it has him thinking that he's finally being acknowledged after all this, and he's finally being rewarded for everything he's went through. But Cassidy quickly lets him know that he will be in complete control of Neely's body, because the only person he can truly trust to watch his own back is himself. But soon after this is done, a green blur strikes Neely, revealing that Hightail and the Cape Killers have made their way there. So Cassidy quickly puts Neely to use so that he can hold them off and give the scientists enough time to get the Stark Sentinel operating so that Cassidy can create this new version of his hive. And as it turns out, Cassidy's plans for distracting Miles and the others, it's very effective, because at one point he locks Electro inside of some old Stark armor, which isn't as well insulated on the inside, which I mean, I don't know if this would even harm Electro, but at least we're not going back to the whole sprinkler system thing, which was really Max Dillon's greatest foe for decades. But now with the science is done and Kaiju Cassidy powered up, Miles attempts to hit him with the Venom Blast because it worked last time. But this go round, Miles just bounces right off of him as Cassidy uses this Stark Sentinel to inject himself into the building's neural network, which again, this is the idea that Cassidy got when Miles hit him with the Venom Blast. And just before he overloaded, Cassidy saw the potential of this Symbiote, which changed his mind, with Cassidy believing that this is the greater method for him to remake the world in his image. Alright, so jumping back into Carnage Reigns, where at this time Cletus Kasady's used the Symbiote-infused Stark Sentinel to expand his Grendel abilities through the internet so that he can possess a larger number of people than what we've seen so far at Todd's Diner and with Kenneth Neely. But before we see this carried out, we're also shown that there's a few Cletus Kasady stands who are online talking to each other on some sort of forum or thread, and they've been following the recent news of what's been going on with Cletus Kasady since the massacre at Todd's Diner. And now with Cassidy connected to the web, he's starting to send out video calls that allow him to control people, which is something that these guys were made aware of, with calls going out to people nearby them. Though at this point, none of these guys have received the call, which causes them to speculate for a moment as far as why Cassidy's doing this, and one of them takes a guess that it's probably because Cassidy wants to eat them, only for another one to respond that he's actually okay with that, which is wild. But from here, we then head over to Liz Allen's apartment, where we find Cassidy trying to reach out to her while using Flash Thompson's name on the caller ID to make sure that she picks up, but instead the phone's answered by her stepson, Stanley Osborn, who's the son of the clone of Harry Osborn and Lily Hollister. And as soon as Cassidy gets Stanley on the phone, he tells Stanley to put the phone up good and close to his ear so that he could tell him the most biggest epic secret in the whole wide world, which of course, like we were told, this is just Cassidy's new method of controlling others by way of video call. So next he gets Stanley to grab a Chucky-sized knife and go after Liz while she's taking a bubble bath with her earbuds in, which is why she can't hear him come in or nothing like that. But fortunately, Normie's able to step in and stop the mind-controlled Stanley from sending Liz to the upper room. And right away, Cassidy sees Normie and he brings up his past as Goblin Child, as well as his current situation with Normie recently becoming the Red Goblin, which are all videos that I have linked down in the comments below, starting with Norman Osborn still in the Carnage Symbiote, as well as Dark Web and the current Venom series. Because through the course of these events, Dylan gave Normie this symbiote so that he could help Dylan in the upcoming Symbiote War, which is still a ways down the line. And with Normie getting the symbiote, he named it Rascal, but he's still learning how to handle its unique abilities. And now, with Normie seeing that they have to deal with Cletus Kasady, he's not exactly sure if they're up to the task. And right now, Cletus, he's trying to get Normie to look at the phone so that he can be the next puppet, only for a sudden explosion to then go off outside, showing Normie and Rascal that Cletus Kasady is already taking control of a large number of civilians in the area, which from here seamlessly takes us back over to the Cape Killers, who are trying to contain these mind-controlled people within the area without using any lethal methods, which is kinda hard for Electro because she's practically trying to hold people back with lightning, which causes her to ask where is Scorpion and why isn't he helping with the containment part. And for us, that's an answer that we get rather quickly, because back over at Stark Unlimited Tower, Cassidy and Gargan are kind of in the middle of a conversation, with Cassidy telling him how what he's doing is truly setting these people free, with Cassidy making them act out violent desires that these people have been had for each other that otherwise they would have never done. And I gotta give it to Scorpion here, because even in the face of what seems to be certain death, he just lets Cassidy know that this is gonna end for him the same way it usually does, with him losing. And Cletus tells him in response, if it is, you ain't gonna be alive to see it, only for Scorpion to then be saved by Agent Gao, who's able to shoot him free just in the nick of time. And from here, when Scorpion asks Gao how bad is it, she lets him know that Cassidy's consciousness has been contained to this area, because the network that he's using is an old Stark Escape network, which for the most part just reaches throughout New York. But on their way out, Gao then gets a call from Fei Long, who once again is the new owner of Stark Unlimited, where here not only do we find out that he's the person who's been providing Agent Gao's special division with their gear, but also he's calling to let her know that he's sending in a couple of Stark Sentinels to help her and the Cape Killers get things under control. Meanwhile, back on the ground, we see that Normie's made his way out, suited up as the Red Goblin after locking his little brother in the broom closet to keep him safe, or at least keep him away from his mom Liz, since her self-care Sundays take about 2 hours. So Normie's hoping that that's enough time for him to get Stanley back to normal and get back home to his mom. But while he's down here trying to help with the crowd control, Miles comes crashing down fast and hard, which for Normie, though he doesn't really show it or express it with his words, he's fanning out a little bit, because for everyone who took after his grandfather with the mantle of Green Goblin, it's only corrupted them. But now with him seeing Brooklyn Spider-Man in action, up close, Normie's just like, look at this guy, he inspires greatness. And for Miles, he's just looking at Normie kinda like, who are you supposed to be? And Normie just lets him know that he's working on it, cause he hasn't made like an official name for himself. But mid-conversation, the two of them are attacked by Kenneth Neely, who once again is just another one of Cassidy's puppets. So really and truly, this is Cletus Kasady, doing a bit of remote play with the attacks out here. And in this fight, Miles tries to just rip this armor and some of the symbiote off of Neely, so Cassidy makes Neely take off, with his plan being that he's gonna take Miles so high that he won't have enough air to scream, let alone breathe. And on top of that, on their way up, Cassidy's trying to bite Miles' head off, but to everyone's surprise, and especially Neely, cause if we're honest, he was getting ready to die too. But to everyone's surprise, Normie grabs a hold of Neely's legs, and he uses Rascal's unique symbiote power to absorb the symbiote that Cassidy gave to Neely, effectively saving Miles and Neely, bringing them both back down to the ground. So Cassidy, who's pissed, he sends a ton of nearby civilians after Miles and Normie, only for a huge blast to come in, knocking all these people away, which initially has Miles hoping that this is the Avengers showing up. But instead, it's the 2 Stark Sentinels that was sent here by Fei Long to help take down Cletus Kasady, who we then jump back over to, heading into Carnage issue 14, where now Cassidy's thinking some things over, starting with the Carnage symbiote, who's also out there becoming a god, even though the two of them define that word differently, as they both take very different approaches towards becoming a god after going their separate ways. And from here, Cassidy then thinks about his current approach, with him tapping into Stark's old network, allowing him to mind control civilians in the area, which now makes him more dangerous than ever. But now he has the issue of the Osborn kid, who has the ability to absorb symbiote matter somehow, alongside of Miles Morales, who was able to hurt Cassidy in the Extremio, who as it turns out, that's who Cassidy's talking to right now. But with how this is done, Cassidy sees it no different than him talking to a $20 hatchet from Home Depot. Cause when he's alone, he just talks to his tools, which he uses to turn everything into a mirror. And Cassidy even admits that when he feels small, he just does the same old thing. He multiplies, much like in Carnage USA and Absolute Carnage. And all of this makes them predictable. It makes them vulnerable. And he thinks perhaps that's the reason why he always loses. So he decides here that changing his tactics, that's not the solution, but instead he's just been thinking too small. He's been trying to reach millions instead of trillions. So now Cassidy plans to use these Iron Man armors to build a bigger mirror. And from here we head over to Midtown for a moment, where we find Kenneth Neely, who's been taken in by Agent Gao. And he just looks crazy here, mumbling on about how Carnage used him and Cassidy used him. And now Gao is just looking at him like, okay, this guy's broken, he's shattered, just like anything Cletus Kasady touches. And alongside Agent Gao, we also have Fei Long here, who brought with him a nanotech that was specifically designed to remove symbiotic matter from inorganic systems. Because the way he sees it, Agent Gao's been talking about Cletus Kasady the same way their ancestors would have spoken about the plague or genetic oddities. But to him, Cassidy's not like an active god or a plague. He's just a problem. And he's a problem that Fei Long has the solution to. So from here, he goes back to his hotel suite and he sends his commands to his Stark Sentinels. Meanwhile, in the case of Normie, he's been trying to manually absorb the Clintar sonic frequencies that Cassidy has sent to these people through the phone, and it's starting to take its toll on him, because what he's taken out from them, it's all just been building up in his symbiote. And as for Fei Long's plan of sending these Stark Sentinels after Cassidy and his Extremio Sentinel, things get dicey rather quickly. Because as soon as the two of them confirm that they're delivering the nanotech payload, seconds later they're reporting structural integrity compromised, which then has Fei Long kind of like, okay, this ain't looking good. While at this time, when we go back to Miles, Scorpion, and Normie, they're making their way up Stark Unlimited Tower, so that they can get Normie closer to Cassidy in hopes of Normie's symbiote being able to absorb just enough to sever Cassidy's connection and end this once and for all. And right now, with Cassidy fighting off both of these Stark Sentinels, we then see that Fei Long's nanotech is successfully and fully offloaded, destroying Cassidy's broadcast by cutting him off from Stark's old network, causing Cassidy to be expelled from the Stark Sentinel, and he's not happy about it one bit. And Fei Long lets Cletus know now that he's isolated, he's moving to the next step, which is elimination. And even though Cassidy doesn't know whose voice that is, remotely speaking through the systems to him, he's just yelling out all the crazy things he's gonna do to that person when he finds out whose voice that was. But now with Cassidy kicked out and weakened and looking crazy, Scorpion takes the fight right back to him, which is really nothing more than a distraction so that Normie can go after Cassidy and hopefully just incapacitate him. And this whole time, Miles is right there with them, making sure that he's still with them and asking Normie over and over again if he's sure about this. But when Normie connects to Cassidy, he says it's like staring into an endless ocean of cruelty. It overwhelms him and he tells Miles that he can't do it just before he crashes from the overload. So Miles just picks him up and he tells Scorpion that they gotta get out of there now. And he lets Normie know that it's okay, he did his best, but again, they gotta go. And with them really having nowhere to go up here, Miles tells Scorpion that they gotta just jump. And he asks Scorpion if he's ready, and Scorpion says nope. So Miles tells him, look at it this way, you can either jump out of this skyscraper or stick around and get eaten by that, which were words that worked well enough to get Scorpion moving. But it's funny because from here, with Cassidy leaving Stark Unlimited, or at least stepping outside in his new look, you got the Cletus stands making comments online like, Daddy Cletus got thick with 2 C's. But with seeing this and what happens next, this brings us to the next phase of what Cassidy was talking about when he pointed at the Iron Man armor and went on to mention that he needs to build a bigger mirror. And with Cassidy losing his access to Tony's old network, he still has the Symbiote. So as it turns out, he sent away 3 different Iron Man armors, one to Queens, one to New Jersey, one to Staten Island, each going out to one of his 3 stands, who we saw before watching the news and just hoping that Cassidy would reach out. So he approaches them all, telling them that they are his insurance, which is something that they couldn't be more excited about. And meanwhile, also in New Jersey, a very pissed off Tony Stark has been made aware of what's going on, with Cassidy using his tech to terrorize the neighborhood. So he suits up to make his way down there and make sure that Cassidy doesn't get away with this. Alright, so going into the conclusion of Carnage Reigns, we begin with the 3 Cletus Kasady stands who have now come together, meeting up in Jamaica, Queens to see if they can figure out how to actually use these Iron Man suits that Cassidy gave them. But while they're inspecting the Symbiote infused merchandise, Cassidy activates them, suits them up, and gets them heading towards the fight. Where now, back in Manhattan, Symbiote Cassidy is giving Miles and the other Cape Killers a run for their money. And the only person who's shown the potential of being able to stop Cassidy is the Red Goblin, and he's out cold. So Miles is trying to get him to safety while really everyone else is just trying to do what they can. And for a moment, Taskmaster gets a lift from Electro so he can get a better angle for his arrows, but this really doesn't do anything aside from annoying Cassidy even more. So he then sets his sight on Taskmaster and Electro. So Taskmaster tells Electro she needs to speed up because Cassidy's closing in fast. So to speed things up, she drops the dead weight, which was him. To where next she makes her way to Miles and tells him to give her his hand so he can charge her up with his bioelectricity so she can send it right to Cassidy. And with the way this is done, I'm surprised she wasn't just like, Kamehameha, because the delivery and the blast both come off like there's just heavy Dragon Ball inspiration going on here. But this blast did not take out Cassidy, and it didn't faze him nearly as much as Miles' Venom blast back at the diner, which just goes to show how much stronger Cassidy is now. And he doesn't waste any time getting his lick back, with him taking a slice out of Electro, which also knocks her off the building, though fortunately Hightail's there to catch her. And for Taskmaster, it's like he couldn't wait to tell Electro that's what she gets for dropping him earlier. But also Taskmaster managed to swipe a little something from Stark Unlimited that he wanted to test out, which really is just an RPG that he's hoping is gonna have some kind of extra Stark tech on it that'll stop Cassidy once and for all. But when he lets it off, Cassidy just swats it towards a building, endangering a number of civilians. So Miles and Hightail team up and get over there quick so that she can throw the people out to him and he can web them up safely before they're crushed in all the debris, which is a quick plan that worked out rather nicely. But the funny thing is, with Miles catching all these civilians and webbing them up safely, Scorpion then just comes crashing down after attempting to take on Cassidy solo. which now just leaves Miles and Hightail versus Cassidy, with Agent Gao radioing in like, "You two better hold the line." And to make things worse, Sergeant Ahmed lets Agent Gao know they got 3 Stark Tech energy signatures heading their way, and they're older models at that. And Agent Gao really doesn't know what this means. Not fully. Not yet. And not too long after, her and some of her men come in for air support. But while they're trying to help Miles, Hightail, and Scorpion, the pilot tells her that they're picking up something on the radar. And at first, Gao thinks it's the 3 incoming Stark relics, which I mean, she's halfway right, cause it's Tony Stark, who's a relic in his own right. But this Dragon Slayer armor that Tony's wearing, it's brand new. And from the moment that Tony shows up, he's hitting Cassidy with all kind of sonics, blasts, constructs, you name it. Because ever since Cassidy took the Symbiote from Tony, he had been planning for this moment when Cassidy would return with it, which is also why this titanium armor that Tony's wearing is themed like a knight. Since, you know, the Symbiote is a symbiote dragon, so who better to slay the dragon than a knight in shining armor from a long time ago. And Tony's not playing any games. He cranks up the power because he wants Cassidy to feel this. But also by using so much juice, Tony completely drains his power cells, which then causes him to come crashing down. So he asks Miles to give him a jump, and just like that, Tony's back up. And it's cool to see because Miles Morales, he ain't no Kevin Gates. But if you need a jump, he'll get you going with just a touch. But in the middle of this conversation, Cassidy catches Miles slipping from behind by running an Symbiote scythe right through him, only to then take off and leave, while telling them that he's done with the small fry and that he needs to bite at something bigger. He needs to spread this thing far and wide. He needs to spread real carnage, which now leaves Miles bleeding out with a punctured lung and broken ribs. So Tony tells him to stay still, because this is gonna sting a lot, as Tony gives Miles what he calls a special cast to speed up his recovery process, which will both keep him protected and keep his vitals up, with Miles now having a brand new Iron Spider suit, which looks so good. But as soon as Miles gets it, him and Tony go right after Cassidy, with there really being no time to just stop and appreciate how good the new spider armor looks, which makes sense because Cassidy's the priority right now. But I also gotta say, if nothing else, Carnage Reigns has brought some nice looking drip scattered around here and there. And you already know I'm a sucker for some new skins or fresh colorway, so more often than not, I'ma welcome the new additions. But getting back to it, with Tony and Miles catching up with Cassidy, they hit him hard. And Cassidy hits back, which is a counter that knocked Tony and Miles into a building, which causes Tony to stop for a second and call for a huddle, where he then lets the team know if they can get him inside of that thing, he can take down Cassidy for good. And it's a plan that doesn't initially sit well with Miles, because he doesn't want to kill anybody, even someone like Cletus Kasady. But Tony lets him know they might not even have that choice this time, and after that he calls for his temporary Avengers to assemble so they can go and slay this dragon. Which at the end, that was really Tony doing a bit of fast talk so he ain't gotta go back and forth with Miles. But while the team is tearing into Cassidy, Cletus lets out a call for all the civilians under his control, as well as his new team of Iron Men, to assemble and take on Dragon Slayer Tony and his temporary Avengers. So Agent Gao, with her seeing the mismatch from above, she sends the Red Goblin back into the fight, which now just has her up in the chopper with the pilot and Kenneth Neely. But down on the ground, when Tony sees these other suits, his throwback suits laced with Symbiote material, it's just causing the technical side of him to have so many questions, because at a glance he doesn't understand how they're powered, or even how Cletus got his hands on those older suits in particular. But he doesn't think about it too long before him and Miles gotta fight them off, and eventually Tony activates Earmuff Protocol, which automatically covers Miles' ears too, to where next Tony uses a heavy sonic attack that just blasts the Cassidy stands out of their suits. And also with seeing this, Tony tells Miles that the real Cletus Kasady's long gone, and all that's really left is a mess of tech and a number of compounds fighting for control, in hopes of helping Miles understand that Cletus Kasady's already dead. So what they're planning to do is not like they're actually killing him. Meanwhile, with Agent Gao, Kenneth Neely sees his opportunity when a piece of one of the Symbiote Iron Men splashed on the window of the chopper, so he bonds with that piece. He grabs the pilot and he sends the chopper going down fast. Cause for Neely, the way he sees it, Cletus can't lose here today because Neely needs him to go after Carnage. So this guy's wildin', he's a man on a mission. So he sends the chopper going down as he smacks Agent Gao out of it, which now sets off Miles' spider sense since they got a chopper incoming. So he quickly hops to it and he saves Agent Gao. But we'll have to wait and see if any of this contributes towards changing her mind as far as the way that she feels about supers, cause Miles and Tony could have just got out the way. And with Neely making his way to Cassidy, Neely lets him know that he got his message. He understands his purpose now. And he tells Cassidy even if he beats Iron Man and Spider-Man here, Carnage is still out there in the stars, waiting. But Cletus more or less takes this as a sign of disrespect, because he's not going to let Neely tell him what he can and can't do. So he takes back the piece of the Symbiote that Neely has on him for Cassidy to get himself nearly back to full power, only for him to then impale a dazed and confused Kenneth Neely and absorb him into himself, while telling Neely, come on, you had to know it was going to end this way. So next, Tony tells Miles to buy him some time so that Tony can prep the air quotes nuclear option, which at first Miles thought he was talking about literally. But no, it's the same EMP plan, and he lets Miles know that he's gonna need at least 5 minutes. And as Miles goes back to Cassidy to keep him busy, Neely's speaking to Cassidy from the Hive, telling him how he's incomplete without the Carnage Symbiote, and how what Cassidy is now is nothing compared to what the Carnage Symbiote has become. And it's a lot for Cassidy to handle, with him having to juggle fighting Iron Spider Miles Morales and listen to Neely, who's even annoying in death. And this is something that Miles takes full advantage of, even though he doesn't know what exactly is going on as far as the conversation between Neely and Cassidy, because for Miles he thinks it's just the extra training that's causing him to do so good all of a sudden. Which to me, I'm kind of like, I don't think so. And I mean, maybe a little, but I'm pretty sure the new suit as well as Cassidy slowing down because of Neely have something to do with it as well. But either way, doesn't matter, because the 5 minutes are up and Tony's back. So he goes full speed right into Cassidy's chest, because now that his ultimate's charged up, he can hit the EMP full power purge from the inside and blast Cassidy into pieces. Which for Tony, this is another one of those things that's just a one-off. So his suit's practically fried, and he's not able to do a scan for any signs of life to make sure that Cassidy's gone. So Tony just eyeballs it, and he's like, Cassidy looks pretty gone to me. Because now the civilians are all coming back to their senses, and any signs of Symbiote matter seems to have been fried, which now pretty much wraps up Carnage Reigns. But there's one more thing that happens here that I am not happy about, and it's the fact that before Tony leaves, he takes back the Iron Spider suit, which right there just had me like, man, can your boy just hold it for a few more issues? Or at least let him rock it through the next event coming up? Like, come on. But nope, Tony just tells Miles it's more like a, break the glass in case of an emergency type of thing. And that's that. So from here, Tony gives Miles a ride back to Brooklyn, which I guess is the least he can do, which now gets Miles back to his family. But back over at the blast site, we see that there's still a small puddle of Symbiote goo with a face emerging from it, which lets us know that the larger story yet continues. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/Dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.